It was a quiet evening and the streets were calm, almost empty. Keanu Reeves, trying to keep a low profile, was driving through a neighborhood he didn't know very well. He liked to escape the spotlight sometimes, just to have a few hours of peace, but tonight, luck seemed not to be on his side. As he turned a corner, his car made a strange noise and then suddenly it jerked and stopped completely. He tried to start it again, but it wouldn't budge. The engine had clearly given up and he was stuck. Keanu looked around. The street was lined with small shops, most of them closed, with dim lights flickering inside. He got out of the car and checked his phone. The battery was low. Calling for help wasn't really an option, not tonight. He sighed quietly and pushed the car slowly to the side, hoping to find something, a place, a person, a hint of help. A little further down the road, he noticed a small repair shop. It didn't look fancy at all. The paint was fading, and the sign above the door was slightly crooked. There was a faint smell of oil and grease in the air. A small light shone through the dusty windows, giving the shop a warm, quiet glow. He parked the car outside and got out, looking around nervously. From inside the shop, a man came out. He was in his late 30s or early 40s, with worn hands and a tired face, but there was something calm and steady in his eyes. He looked Keanu up and down as if trying to figure him out, but didn't say anything yet. "Can I help you?" the mechanic asked, his voice kind but cautious. "My car. It just broke down," Keanu said simply. "I don't know what happened." "Could you take a look?" The mechanic nodded. "Sure, let's see what we can do." Keanu watched as the man walked around the car, checking under the hood with careful, practiced movements. He noticed how the mechanic treated his small helper, a young boy who was probably just starting out in the shop. He spoke gently, guiding him without raising his voice. The boy looked up to the mechanic with respect and trust. Keanu smiled faintly. Even in this small shop, far from the red carpets and cameras, he could see that people still cared about each other. The mechanic inspected the engine, tapping and listening, occasionally wiping his hands on a rag. After a few moments, he shook his head slightly. "It's a serious issue. It's going to take a while to fix. Are you okay waiting?" Keanu nodded. "Yes, I'll wait." Hours passed. The sun slowly set, and the warm glow from the shop's windows turned golden. The street outside grew quieter. Cars passed occasionally, but no one paid much attention to the little repair shop. Inside, the mechanic worked tirelessly, checking every part, replacing pieces, and making sure everything was perfect. He didn't complain once. His assistant ran small errands, handing him tools, learning quietly as the mechanic continued his work with focus and patience. Keanu watched from the corner, noticing the small details, how the mechanic moved with care, how he didn't rush even when tired, how he made sure his assistant learned properly. He also noticed the shop itself, how simple and modest it was, yet somehow full of warmth. There was a sense of pride, not in money or fame, but in doing a job well, in helping others, in being reliable. As the night deepened, the shop's old fluorescent lights flickered softly, casting shadows across the walls. The smell of oil and metal mixed with the faint aroma of coffee that the mechanic's assistant had brewed earlier. Keanu felt strangely at ease here, in this quiet place, surrounded by ordinary people living ordinary lives, so different from the world he usually saw. Finally, after hours of careful work, the mechanic stepped back, wiping his hands again. "It's done," he said simply. "Your car should be fine now. You can try it." Keanu held his breath as he got back into the driver's seat. He turned the key and the engine roared back to life, smooth and steady. He smiled. It was working perfectly. He reached into his wallet. "How much do I owe you?" he asked. The mechanic looked at him calmly and shook his head. "Nothing. Consider it a favor. Just glad I could help." Keanu blinked in surprise. I can't just take that, please." The mechanic smiled faintly. "I know who you are," he said quietly. "But that doesn't matter. Tonight, I just did what I thought was right. No money needed." Keanu didn't argue. He nodded and stepped out of the car. "Thank you," he said softly, a genuine gratitude in his voice. He handed the keys back and started walking toward the street. Fading into the night. Inside the shop, the mechanic's assistant finally spoke. "Did we just fix a celebrity's car?" he whispered, eyes wide. The mechanic didn't answer at first. He just smiled. "Doesn't matter," he said. "We did what was right. That's all that matters." As Keanu walked away, the quiet of the street seemed even deeper. He had come here by chance, and yet he had found something rare, a place where kindness wasn't bought. And work wasn't about money, but about pride, honesty, and care. Back inside the shop, the mechanic cleaned up, humming quietly to himself. The young assistant watched in awe, seeing a side of life he hadn't really understood before. Sometimes doing something simple, something human, made a bigger impact than anyone could imagine outside. Keanu disappeared into the shadows of the night, leaving the small shop behind. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew this night would stay with him. The mechanic didn't know it either, but he had just done something extraordinary without realizing it. And sometimes extraordinary things happen quietly without anyone noticing. At least not at first. That night, the streets went quiet again. But for the mechanic, something had shifted, even if he didn't yet understand it. And for Keanu, a simple act of kindness would linger in his mind, quietly reminding him that the world, even in the smallest corners, still had people who did the right thing, just because it was the right thing to do, and little did either of them know, this quiet, ordinary night would soon lead to something truly extraordinary, something that would shock everyone. But for now, all that mattered was the quiet human connection they had shared in that little old, glowing repair shop. The next morning, the small repair shop woke up to the usual sounds of the neighborhood. Birds chirped outside, the sun slowly rose, and the mechanic arrived early, just like he always did. He opened the shop doors, rubbing his hands together, ready to start a new day of work. But even as he went about his routine, his mind kept wandering back to last night. The car had left without paying. Keanu Reeves had come, received help, and quietly gone without asking for anything in return. At first, the mechanic hadn't thought much about it. He had done what he felt was right, and that was enough. But now, with the morning calm settling in, he started to wonder. His young assistant came running in, excitement written all over his face. "Did you know who that was?" he asked, barely able to contain himself. The mechanic looked up from the workbench, wiping his hands on a rag. "I didn't ask," he said calmly, "but it was Keanu Reeves." The assistant almost shouted, "The movie star! The one from all those big films?" The mechanic chuckled softly. "Doesn't change anything," he said. "We fixed the car. That's what matters." The assistant stared at him, wide-eyed. "But he didn't pay. And he didn't just not pay, he didn't even leave a tip. Can you imagine what other people would do?" The mechanic shook his head. "We did what we thought was right. That's enough. We don't do this for recognition. We do it because it's the right thing to do." The assistant frowned but didn't argue. He went to start preparing the tools for the day, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the night before. Everyone in the neighborhood had probably already started talking about it. Even if no one knew the whole story, the mechanic went about his morning, taking in small tasks, organizing spare parts, checking the schedule for the day, and talking to customers who came in with ordinary problems. But even with all the routine, there was a quiet tension in the air. Something had changed. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he felt a little lighter, a little prouder, and at the same time a little more nervous. Word spread slowly through the neighborhood. By midday, a few regular customers had walked in, whispering excitedly. "Did you hear about the car that got fixed for free last night?" one asked. "They say it was a famous movie star's car." The mechanic smiled politely, but didn't confirm or deny anything. He had no desire for attention. His shop was small, and he liked it that way. But still he felt a quiet thrill. He had helped someone, truly helped, without any expectation. And, in a way, that felt better than any reward money could give. As the day went on, life returned to normal in the shop. Cars came and went, customers chatted about small things, and the mechanic worked steadily. But deep down, he kept thinking about Keanu. There was something about the way he had acted, calm, kind, and surprisingly humble, that had left an impression. The mechanic had met many people over the years, rich and poor, famous and unknown. But very few had been like that evening. When the shop was closing, the mechanic leaned against the counter, staring out at the quiet street. He thought about the choices people make when no one is watching. He thought about how small acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. Last night's simple decision to help a stranded man had reminded him of that. Meanwhile, the young assistant was still buzzing with energy. "Do you think he'll come back?" he asked, almost pleading. The mechanic shook his head gently. "Maybe," he said. "But even if he doesn't, it doesn't matter. We did our part." Still, the assistant couldn't let it go. What if he tells someone? What if someone comes here and offers to help us because of what we did? The mechanic smiled faintly. "We don't know what will happen. And we don't need to. We just do what's right and let life take care of the rest." Days passed and life continued in its normal rhythm. The shop struggled a little financially, as usual, but the mechanic didn't mind. He had learned to live simply and to appreciate small victories. He found satisfaction in solving problems, in teaching his assistant, and in treating every customer with care. No matter how small their car or problem was, yet there was an undercurrent of anticipation. Something had changed last week. The assistant kept asking questions, neighbors kept watching quietly, and the mechanic felt a subtle shift in energy around the shop. People spoke of the night Keanu Reeves came, though no one knew the full story. On the 7th day after the repair, the mechanic was sweeping the floor, lost in thought, when he heard the roar of engines outside. The street, usually quiet in the evening, suddenly felt alive. Heads poked out of windows. Neighbors stopped their evening routines. Even the birds seemed to pause, as if sensing something unusual. The mechanic straightened up, wiping his hands. "What is it now?" he muttered under his breath. He walked to the front door and peeked outside. He couldn't believe his eyes. A small convoy of luxury cars had pulled up in front of the shop. Shiny, polished, and expensive, they seemed completely out of place in the quiet neighborhood. People in suits stepped out of the vehicles, carrying briefcases and speaking quietly to each other. A crowd began forming across the street, whispering and pointing. The mechanic's heart beat faster. He didn't recognize any of the people around him, but he had a strong feeling something extraordinary was about to happen. His assistant ran to his side, wide-eyed. "Do you see that? Do you see them?" Before the mechanic could answer, the front door of the last car opened, and there he was, Keanu Reeves himself, stepping out calmly, almost as if he belonged there. He looked around the small shop, smiling faintly, and the crowd grew silent. People stopped talking. Phones appeared, but no one dared approach too closely. Keanu walked toward the mechanic, who stood frozen. He didn't know what to expect. Was this a complaint? Was it a misunderstanding? His mind raced. Keanu stopped a few steps away, looking directly at the mechanic. "Hello," he said softly, in a tone that was kind and unassuming. "Can I have a word with you?" The mechanic nodded, swallowing hard. "Of course," he said. Keanu gestured for the assistant and the other people in the shop to come forward. Slowly, everyone gathered, their curiosity mixed with awe. Keanu spoke calmly, but there was a weight in his words. "I came here last week," he began. "My car broke down and you helped me. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't expect anything in return. That act, it meant more than you realize." The mechanic shook his head. "It was just a car," he said quietly. "I did what I thought was right." Keanu smiled faintly. "It was more than that," he said. "It was an act of kindness in a world that often forgets what that means. And I want you to know that it did not go unnoticed." The mechanic's assistant whispered, "What is he talking about?" Keanu didn't answer directly. He looked at the mechanic again. "I have a small gift for you." "Nothing for me. Just something to show my appreciation for your honesty and kindness." The mechanic's mind raced. He couldn't imagine what this could be. He had done his work without thinking about rewards. That's what he believed in. And yet here was Keanu, standing quietly, calmly, ready to change something about the shop, the neighborhood, or maybe even their lives. The quiet tension in the street was almost unbearable. People held their breath. The assistant's eyes were wide, and the neighbors across the street were leaning forward, trying to see what would happen. Keanu reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't designed to impress anyone. It was simple, clean, and neat. He handed it to the mechanic. The mechanic took it cautiously. He hesitated for a moment, then opened it. Inside were documents and notes, not just money, but plans, instructions, and support. Keanu was offering to help in a way the mechanic couldn't have imagined. The mechanic looked up, stunned. I don't know what to say, he said softly. Keanu smiled. You don't need to say anything, he said. Just keep doing what you do. You've already made a difference in my life. Now, I want to help make a difference in yours. The crowd erupted in quiet applause. The assistant was jumping up and down, unable to contain his excitement. Neighbors whispered to each other. Amazed at what was happening, the mechanic stood still for a moment, letting it all sink in. He had never expected this. He had done what he thought was right, without thinking about rewards, and now, in a single moment, his world was about to change, and as he looked at Keanu Reeves, standing calmly, quietly, and humbly in front of him, he realized something. Kindness has a way of coming back, often in ways that are bigger than anyone can imagine. The morning after Keanu Reeves' unexpected visit, the small repair shop was buzzing with a strange energy. The streets felt different, almost alive. Word had spread across the neighborhood that something extraordinary had happened the night before. People whispered as they passed the shop, pointing and nodding. But no one wanted to disturb the quiet dignity of the place. The mechanic arrived early. As usual, though this time he felt a mix of excitement and nervousness he hadn't felt in years. The envelope Keanu had given him lay on the workbench. He hadn't opened it yet. Part of him hesitated, unsure if he deserved what was inside. Another part of him was curious, eager to see what someone like Keanu could possibly offer a small, struggling shop like his. The young assistant bounced into the shop, carrying a box of tools and barely able to contain his energy. Did you open it yet? He asked. Come on, what is it? The mechanic shook his head. Not yet, he said quietly. Let's start the day first. We have work to do. But work felt different that day. Every car that drove in, every customer who entered, seemed to carry a sense of anticipation. People had heard the story. They were curious to see what would happen next. The mechanic felt the weight of eyes on him. Though no one had directly asked him about Keanu, even so, it made him a little uncomfortable. He had never sought attention or fame, and suddenly he felt that spotlight in a place he had always considered private. Around midday, a sleek black car pulled up outside the shop. It was expensive, far more than the usual vehicles the shop handled. The driver stepped out and looked around, hesitating for a moment before walking toward the shop. Can I help you? The mechanic asked, wiping his hands. The driver smiled politely. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Reeves, he said. He wanted to make sure everything here is in order and see if there's anything he can do to help. The mechanic froze. He hadn't expected this. I don't know what to say, he stammered. The driver handed him a folder. Inside were plans, invoices, and documents detailing upgrades, new equipment, and even support for the assistant's education. The mechanic's eyes widened as he went through them. It was more than he had ever dreamed of. Keanu wasn't just thanking him for fixing the car. He was offering to change the shop's future. By late afternoon, the mechanic had begun to understand the full scope of what was happening. Keanu Reeves had not just noticed his kindness, he had decided to invest in it. New tools, new machines, even improvements to the building itself. Everything the shop had ever lacked was suddenly within reach. Word spread quickly. Neighbors came by, some out of curiosity, others to congratulate the mechanic quietly. People whispered about how a simple act of honesty and kindness had attracted someone as famous as Keanu Reeves. The mechanic remained humble, refusing to let pride take over. He knew he had done what was right, and that was the core of everything. That evening, Keanu returned in person. The mechanic had barely slept, not out of worry but out of anticipation. What could he possibly want now? The assistant practically ran in circles with excitement. Keanu walked in calmly as if he belonged there. He looked around the small shop, taking in every detail. "How's everything?" he asked softly. The mechanic nodded, still speechless. It's amazing," he said finally. "I don't know how to thank you." Keanu shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. You did something important last week. You helped someone without expecting anything. That matters more than you realize." The mechanic felt a lump in his throat. He had never thought of his actions as extraordinary. He had just done what seemed right at the time. But hearing Keanu say it out loud made him realize the impact of even small choices. The young assistant peeked over the mechanic's shoulder, eyes wide. "So he really noticed us?" he whispered. Keanu smiled faintly. "I did. And I want to make sure you both, and this shop, have a future that matches the effort you put in every day." Over the next few hours, Keanu and his team of assistants began discussing the upgrades and improvements. The mechanic listened, amazed at how carefully every detail was considered, from new equipment that would make repairs faster, to better safety measures, even plans to train the assistant in advanced skills Keanu had thought of. Everything. Neighbors gathered outside the shop as word spread that Keanu Reeves himself was personally involved in helping the small business. Cameras weren't allowed, but whispers and glances carried the story across the street. Everyone wanted to see how a quiet, ordinary shop could suddenly become extraordinary. Throughout the day, the mechanic's mind raced. He tried to imagine what life would be like once these improvements were in place. Would business finally pick up? Would the assistant have opportunities he never dreamed of? Could this small shop, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, become something that made a real difference in people's lives? Keanu's calm presence made the mechanic feel at ease. There was no ego, no fanfare, just genuine concern and respect. It reminded him of why he had started the shop in the first place: to help people, to provide honest work, and to create a small space where kindness mattered more than money. As evening approached, Keanu looked around the shop one last time. "I know this might feel overwhelming," he said softly. "But remember, you earned this. You didn't ask for it, you didn't seek it, you just acted with integrity. That's why it's here." The mechanic felt a deep gratitude. He realized that true kindness didn't come with expectations, and true generosity often came quietly in ways that were surprising and life-changing. The assistant, still barely able to contain his excitement, whispered, "I never imagined this could happen." The mechanic smiled, finally understanding that the moment wasn't just about tools or equipment. It was about trust, respect, and human connection. It was about showing that even small acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. That night, the street outside the shop was quiet again, but inside the energy lingered. Plans were made, dreams began to take shape, and hope filled the air in a way that the mechanic had not felt in years. He knew that life had just changed for the better, not because of fame or fortune, but because of one simple, honest act. And though the world outside might never know the full story, inside that small shop, a quiet revolution had begun. The mechanic had repaired a car without thinking of reward. Keanu Reeves had noticed. And now, a chain of generosity, respect, and opportunity had started, a chain that would affect the lives of everyone in that little workshop forever. For the mechanic, it wasn't about money or recognition or fame. It was about seeing the power of human kindness reflected back in ways he could never have imagined. And as he looked around the shop, at the new tools and the eager eyes of his assistant, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a true, quiet, unshakable hope for the future. By the time the night fell, the small shop felt alive in a way it never had before. The walls seemed brighter, the air lighter, and the quiet pride of honest work deeper. The mechanic sat down, exhausted but content, and finally opened the envelope fully, examining every detail of Keanu's plans. He smiled quietly to himself, realizing that a week ago, his life had been ordinary, and now, everything had changed in ways he could never have predicted. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine the possibilities. New tools, More work, more opportunities, and most importantly, the chance to continue doing what he loved, with support he had never thought possible. And deep down, he knew that all of it had started with one simple choice: to help someone without asking for anything in return. And that quiet, small choice had set off a chain reaction that would change not only the mechanic's life, but the lives of everyone who walked through that small repair shop. The following morning, the small repair shop felt completely different. The mechanic arrived early, as usual, but today there was a sense of excitement in the air he couldn't ignore. The sun shone brighter, the streets seemed livelier, and even the old walls of the shop seemed to hum with anticipation. Ever since Keanu Reeves' visit, the shop had taken on a new life, a new possibility, and the mechanic could feel it in every corner. He opened the doors, letting in the fresh morning air. The assistant was already there, running around and arranging tools, unable to hide his excitement. "Today feels different, doesn't it?" the assistant said, his voice almost bouncing with energy. The mechanic smiled softly. "Yes," he said. "Things are about to change, but we still have to do our work, just like always." Even as he spoke, he felt a mixture of nervousness and pride. The plans Keanu had left were detailed and overwhelming. They included not only new equipment, but also improvements to the entire shop, better lighting, new tools, upgraded machines, and even plans to expand the workspace. It was more than the mechanic had ever imagined possible. By mid-morning, a delivery truck arrived, and the first shipment of new tools and equipment was unloaded. The assistant could hardly contain himself, jumping from one box to another, pointing out shiny new wrenches, polished tool sets, and brand new diagnostic machines. The mechanic inspected everything carefully, his hands running over the smooth metal, his mind racing with possibilities. It wasn't just the equipment that amazed him. Keanu had also included plans for staff training, instructions for improving workflow, and ideas for expanding the business in ways the mechanic had never considered. There were charts, notes, and even suggestions for community programs to help young people interested in learning mechanical work. Keanu hadn't just given them tools. He had given them a vision for the future. Throughout the day, neighbors and curious onlookers stopped by to watch the transformation. They whispered among themselves, amazed that a quiet, modest repair shop could suddenly become the center of attention in the neighborhood. Some took photos from a distance. Others simply leaned over the fence, watching as the mechanic and his assistant worked to organize and set up the new equipment. The mechanic felt a mix of pride and responsibility. He had always wanted to do good work, to help his customers honestly, but he had never imagined he would have the chance to do it on such a larger scale. And now, with the resources provided by Keanu, he could take the shop to a level he had never dreamed of. By afternoon, the transformation was visible. The old machines had been replaced with new, efficient ones. Tools were neatly arranged in cases and drawers, ready to be used. The workspace was brighter, cleaner, and more organized. The assistant moved quickly, learning how to use the new equipment, his excitement contagious. Even the mechanic had to smile at how much energy and hope filled the shop. Then, in the late afternoon, Keanu returned. He walked in quietly, without fanfare, just like before, but the impact of his presence was immediate. The mechanic and his assistant looked up in surprise. Though it had been only a few days since his last visit, "Everything looks amazing," Keanu said softly, looking around. "You've done an incredible job getting everything set up." The mechanic felt a lump in his throat. "We couldn't have done it without you," he said quietly. "I can't believe this is real." Keanu shook his head. "You made it real," he said. "I only provided the resources. You put in the work, the care, and the effort. That's what made the difference." The assistant beamed, barely able to contain his excitement. "I can't believe this is happening. This is amazing." Keanu smiled, but his expression remained calm and humble. "It's just the beginning," he said. "The real impact will come from what you do with this. How you use it to help others, how you continue to work honestly, and how you build something meaningful." The mechanic felt a deep sense of gratitude. He realized that this gift was more than just material support. It was a vote of confidence, a belief in his abilities, and a recognition of the honesty and kindness he had shown. It was a reminder that doing the right thing, even when no one is watching, can lead to opportunities beyond imagination. As the day continued, the mechanic and his assistant worked together to reorganize the shop completely. Machines were placed in their new positions, tools were arranged systematically, and new areas were set aside for training and community programs. The assistant was thrilled, learning how to use the new machines, asking questions, and absorbing every piece of knowledge like a sponge. Neighbors stopped by throughout the day, some just to watch, others to offer congratulations. Everyone was amazed at the transformation. The shop, which had always been small and modest, now looked professional and efficient, yet still warm and welcoming. The mechanic felt a sense of pride unlike anything he had experienced before. Keanu stayed for a while, walking through the shop, observing and occasionally offering advice. He didn't stand on ceremony or demand attention. He simply spoke quietly, encouraging the mechanic and his assistant to keep going, to continue learning, and to use this opportunity wisely. At one point, Keanu stopped and looked at the mechanic directly. "Remember," he said softly, "this isn't about fame or recognition. It's about doing what's right, helping others, and building something that lasts. If you keep that in mind, everything else will follow." The mechanic nodded, feeling the weight of those words. He had always believed in hard work and honesty, but hearing it from someone like Keanu made it feel even more important. It was a reminder that integrity and kindness were values worth holding on to, no matter how small or ordinary a person's life seemed. As evening approached, the shop was transformed completely. Boxes of equipment were emptied, machines were running, tools were organized, and even the walls seemed brighter and more welcoming. The assistant looked around in awe. "I can't believe this is our shop," he said, nearly shouting with excitement. The mechanic smiled, watching him. "It's still our shop," he said quietly. "Just better equipped to do the work we always wanted to do." Keanu smiled at both of them. "I know this is just the start," he said. "There's so much more potential here. But what matters most is that you keep working honestly, keep helping people, and keep believing in what you do. Everything else will come naturally." Before leaving, Keanu handed the mechanic a small card. On it was written a simple message: "Kindness matters. Integrity matters. You've shown both. Keep going." The mechanic held it in his hand, feeling a deep sense of connection, not just to Keanu, but to the values that had guided him all his life. It was a reminder that doing the right thing, no matter how small, could lead to results far beyond what anyone could imagine. That night, after the shop was closed, the mechanic sat in the quiet space, reflecting on everything that had happened. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was emotional, mental, and spiritual. He felt hope, pride, and a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, he saw a path forward, a future full of possibilities. The assistant sat next to him, equally quiet for the first time that day, overwhelmed by everything he had seen. "I never thought something like this could happen," he whispered. The mechanic nodded. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the smallest acts of kindness make the biggest difference. We helped someone without expecting anything, and now our lives are changing because of it. That's the power of doing the right thing." Outside, the neighborhood was quiet again, but the transformation inside the shop was complete. The walls, the machines, the tools, and even the people had changed. And all of it had started with a simple act of honesty and kindness. The mechanic realized something important. Life had a way of rewarding integrity, but not always in ways we expect. Sometimes the reward is immediate. Sometimes it comes quietly, later, and in ways that can change everything. As he switched off the lights and locked the door, he felt a quiet pride and satisfaction. He had done the right thing, and it had led to something extraordinary. And though the world outside might never fully understand, inside that small shop a quiet miracle had happened, a miracle born of honesty, kindness, and the courage to do what's right, for the mechanic, for his assistant, and for everyone who would walk through that shop in the future. Life had been transformed. The gift wasn't just the tools or the money or even the upgraded machines. It was the lesson that integrity, And kindness could open doors no one could imagine, and as they both left the shop that night, tired but fulfilled, they knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning of something truly remarkable. The days after Keanu Reeves' visit felt surreal for the small repair shop. The mechanic and his assistant were still adjusting to the changes. New tools, machines, and equipment had transformed the workspace, but more importantly, their sense of possibility had grown. Suddenly, the little shop wasn't just a place to fix cars, it was a place where dreams could start and lives could change. The mechanic woke up early as usual. He still followed his routine, but now every task had a new meaning. As he walked to the shop, he noticed neighbors nodding at him, smiling in ways they hadn't before. The word had spread quietly. Something extraordinary had happened here, and everyone felt a part of it. Inside the shop, the assistant was already busy arranging the new equipment and learning to use it. He had never seen tools like these before, and he was fascinated by how precise and efficient they were. "I never thought I'd get a chance to learn on machines like these," he said, eyes wide with excitement. The mechanic smiled. "It's a big opportunity. Don't waste it," he said softly. "And remember, it's not just the machines, it's what we do with them that matters." Later that morning, a sleek black car pulled up outside the shop. The mechanic looked up, surprised. But it wasn't Keanu this time. It was one of his team members, carrying more documents, plans, and gifts for the shop. They wanted to ensure everything was organized and that the shop could run smoothly. Even in Keanu's absence, the mechanic reviewed the plans carefully. Keanu had thought of everything: improving the workflow, training programs, community outreach, and even support for the assistant's education. It wasn't just about fixing cars anymore. It was about building a future. He realized that what started as a simple act of kindness had grown into a chain of generosity that could touch many lives. Days turned into weeks, and the shop started to thrive. Word of the high-quality service and the upgraded shop spread quickly. Customers began coming from farther away, curious about the place where kindness had been rewarded in such an extraordinary way. Every car that came in was treated with care and honesty, and soon, the mechanic noticed something remarkable. The shop had become a hub for the community. People who had never stopped by before were now seeking advice, learning about car care, and even helping in small ways. The assistant was learning faster than ever. With the new tools and guidance, he was becoming skilled in ways that would have been impossible just weeks earlier. The mechanic watched proudly as the young assistant worked, knowing that this opportunity could change the course of his life forever. One afternoon, the mechanic received a phone call. It was from someone in Keanu's team. "He wants to visit again," the voice said. "He has one more surprise for you." The mechanic felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. What more could Keanu possibly do? He had already transformed the shop and given them the tools, resources, and guidance to succeed. The assistant overheard the news and could hardly contain his excitement. Another surprise? What could it be? He whispered. A few days later, Keanu arrived quietly, without cameras, without fanfare, just like before. This time, he brought with him a few documents and a small envelope. The mechanic felt his heart race. What could it be? Keanu stepped inside, smiling gently. "I wanted to make sure everything is going well," he said. "And I also wanted to give you something that could help you plan for the future, not just the present." The mechanic accepted the envelope carefully. Inside were documents arranging long-term support for the shop, including funds for future upgrades, plans for expansion, and even educational support for the assistant. It was more than he had ever imagined. Keanu spoke softly. "I know you didn't do this for reward. That's why you deserve it. You acted with integrity, and I want to ensure that kindness continues to have an impact." The mechanic felt tears well up in his eyes. He had never expected such generosity. All his life he had worked honestly, helping people, teaching the assistant, and running the shop with care. He had never imagined that someone like Keanu Reeves would notice and reward that in such a profound way. The assistant watched silently, overwhelmed. He didn't fully understand the documents, but he could feel the significance. His dreams suddenly seemed closer than ever. The small shop that had once struggled was now a place full of hope, opportunity, and promise. As days went by, the mechanic realized that his life had changed, but he had not. He was still the same person, working with care, teaching the assistant, and helping customers honestly. What had changed was the reach of his actions. Now he had the means to help more people, to teach more students, and to grow the shop into a place that could make a real difference in the community. The assistant continued to learn quickly. With the new equipment and guidance, he was becoming skilled, confident, and eager to take on responsibilities. The mechanic saw a future for him that was brighter than anything he had imagined before. He knew that Keanu's support wasn't just about the shop. It was about giving someone else the chance to succeed. Just as he had worked hard to succeed himself, one evening, as the shop quieted down and the sun set over the neighborhood, the mechanic sat with the assistant, reflecting on everything that had happened. "Do you realize what we've been given?" he asked quietly. The assistant nodded. "I think so. We've been given more than just tools. We've been given a chance to build something bigger, to learn, and to make a difference." The mechanic smiled softly. "Exactly. And it all started with one simple act, helping someone without expecting anything in return. That's the most important lesson." Word of the shop's transformation continued to spread. People came not only for repairs but also to learn, to seek guidance, and to be inspired by what had happened here. The mechanic realized that small acts of kindness, done without expectation, could create ripples that reached far beyond what anyone could see. Over time, the shop became known not just for quality work, but for the values it represented. Honesty, integrity, and generosity became part of its reputation. Customers respected the mechanic and his assistant not just for their skills, but for the way they treated people with fairness and care. The assistant grew into a skilled worker, eventually taking on responsibilities that allowed the mechanic to focus on bigger projects and teaching. The small shop, once limited by resources and recognition, was now a hub of learning, an opportunity for the entire community. The mechanic often thought back to that night when Keanu Reeves' car had broken down. What had seemed like a simple, ordinary act of kindness had grown into something extraordinary. Helping a stranger had changed their lives forever, in ways the mechanic could never have imagined. Keanu never asked for recognition. He quietly observed from afar, occasionally sending guidance or support, but never seeking publicity. The mechanic realized that this was the true meaning of generosity, giving without expecting anything in return, trusting that the right actions would create lasting change. Years later, the shop continued to thrive. The assistant, now skilled and confident, helped train new apprentices. The neighborhood had grown closer, inspired by the example set in that little repair shop. And through it all, the mechanic never forgot the simple lesson that had started it all. Honesty, integrity, and kindness matter. Even as success and recognition came their way, the mechanic remained humble. The shop was still the same place of hard work, care, and human connection that it had always been. But now, it also carried the legacy of generosity and the power of one simple, selfless act. The story of the shop, the mechanic, and the assistant became a quiet legend in the community. People told it not just for the fame of a movie star, but for the lesson it carried, that small acts of kindness, done without expectation, can change lives in ways no one can imagine. And for the mechanic, for the assistant, and for everyone who walked through that shop, life had been transformed. One free repair had grown into a lifetime of opportunity, hope, and human connection. A single act of honesty and care had created ripples that touched more lives than they could ever count. As the sun set over the small neighborhood, the shop stood quietly, a symbol of integrity, kindness, and possibility. And inside, the mechanic and his assistant continued their work, knowing that the smallest choices, made with the right intentions, can lead to the most extraordinary outcomes.